The studio lights never flickered. That was the first sign. On a night that carried the weight of headlines yet to be written, MSNBC's flagship studio in Washington was stripped of all branding. No banners, no slogans, no patriotic flourishes. Just cold glass, white light, and two chairs too far apart for comfort. A long, silent table cut the room in half. At one end sat Donald J. Trump, former and now reinstated President of the United States. His expression was carved from granite, sculpted to repel scrutiny. On the other end sat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, poised like a scalpel. Between them, the air was stiff with expectation. The host, veteran political anchor Ali Velshi, sat center. But he wasn't the focus tonight. He was the ignition. "Tonight," he began, "we are joined by two figures who no longer require introduction but desperately require examination." His tone carried no warmth, only calibration, like a surgeon announcing a difficult incision. To my right, President Donald J. Trump. To my left, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Texas. The subject, the line between personal life, public power, and the limits of immunity under the United States Constitution. Trump didn't move. Crockett blinked once, slow and unhurried. America leaned forward in its seats. Living rooms, bars, airport terminals, cell phones. The country, whether they admitted it or not, was waiting for a punchline, a train wreck, a reckoning. No one expected the name Melania Trump to trigger all three. But first came the silence. Ali turned to the president. "Mr. President, you requested this interview be live. You declined pre-submitted questions. Is there anything you'd like to say before we begin?" Trump adjusted his cuffs, his eyes narrowing into slits. "I'm not here for theater. I'm here because the American people deserve the truth. And I'm not afraid of this little sideshow you've set up. The world knows what's going on. I'm just here to confirm it." His smile didn't reach his eyes. Crockett didn't respond, not yet. Her stillness was louder than any reaction. The studio's cameras hummed gently, almost reverently. Ali turned to her. "Congresswoman Crockett." She didn't even glance at Trump. Her gaze went straight to the nation through the lens. "I didn't come here to debate. I came here to document. The public's been fed a myth for years. A story about loyalty, legacy, and leadership. Tonight we'll peel back that myth. And what we find beneath it may not belong to the presidency at all." Trump rolled his neck, the smirk twitching. That was when the air pressure in the room changed. Something was coming, something he didn't expect. The first strike didn't come from a raised voice. It came from a receipt. Crockett reached under the table and calmly unfolded a single sheet of paper. "I'd like to begin," she said, "with a date." She paused, not for effect, but to be exact. October 14th, 2024. A transfer was initiated between the Manhattan Trust Holding Corporation and a shell firm registered in Liechtenstein. The amount? $14.3 million. The signature on the order was not yours, Mr. President. It was Melania Trump's. Trump didn't flinch, but his right hand curled slightly under the desk. "I bring this up not to attack your wife," she continued, "but because this transfer coincided with a sealed federal request to immunize presidential spouses from post office asset forfeiture. The author of that request, Urso, your legal counsel, filed it 2 days later." Now Trump sat forward. "You're fabricating nonsense from gossip rags," he growled. "No, I'm citing federal records. Records that were unsealed by a court order your team failed to block last month." Ali raised a brow, but said nothing. His silence stretched across the room like a gavel. Trump laughed, the forced kind, jagged and high-pitched. "You're desperate," he snapped. "You can't touch me, so now you're dragging my wife into your political circus." Crockett leaned in, her voice colder than the lights overhead. "She's not being dragged. She left the tent long before the rest of us realized it was on fire." The words hung like smoke. She continued, "For over a year, Melania Trump has been largely absent from public life, and for good reason. She was preparing. While you were planning your return to power, she was quietly preparing her exit." Trump's face twitched. For the first time, something cracked. Not his voice, not his posture, but the aura. "She's your wife," Crockett added, "but the legal trail suggests she's also your contingency plan." Trump exploded, slamming his hand on the table. "Don't talk about my family. Don't talk about things you don't understand." Crockett didn't even blink. "I understand sealed filings in 3 European courts. I understand offshore protections tied to a marital confidentiality clause, updated in early 2023. And I understand what it means when a First Lady starts building a paper trail, not for legacy, but for liability." A deep breath rolled through the audience like thunder behind glass. Ali finally spoke. "Let's maintain decorum." But the storm had already touched down. Trump glared across the table. "You think I'm scared of some lawyer with lipstick and a microphone?" Crockett smiled, sharp and small. "No, I think you're scared of the one person who knew what you'd become before the rest of us did, and made sure she wouldn't go down with you." Fade to black. There are silences that feel like decorum. And then there are silences that reek of design. Melania Trump's had become the latter. Crockett sat upright, her tone now slow, deliberate, the tempo of a teacher unwrapping a lesson her students weren't prepared to hear. "For the last 18 months, she said, America has seen less than a dozen public appearances by the First Lady. No campaign rallies, no international visits, no statements beside the president during policy rollouts. But that silence wasn't an oversight. It was a blueprint." She turned slightly, eyes not on Trump, but on the viewers behind the camera. And what most didn't notice is what her silence was hiding. She laid down a printed itinerary. Every entry was black ink on white. European cities, courtrooms, embassy visits. In the last year alone, Mrs. Trump has made 7 overseas trips, all registered under diplomatic discretion clauses. In 4 of those cases, she was accompanied by private legal counsel, not security. And in 2 of them, she met with government finance ministers in Slovenia and Switzerland. Trump interrupted, voice tight with rage. "You think people care where my wife takes her vacations?" Crockett responded without looking at him. "These weren't vacations. These were legal maneuvers. They were visits to jurisdictions where spousal immunity can be structured, offshore trusts can be layered, and legal protections can be written to outlast federal indictments." Ali adjusted his glasses, lips pursed, eyes narrowed, the face of a man watching live ammunition being used on a national feed. Crockett continued, her voice now soft, almost sympathetic. "For a woman so famously silent, her silence has become deafening, and silence is never accidental in politics. It's often the sound of someone preparing for a future they know is coming." Trump exhaled through his nose, a long, hissing breath meant to restrain something darker behind it. "And the most telling silence," she added, "isn't hers." Trump's head snapped up. "It's yours, Mr. President. Because for all your tweets, speeches, and self-declared victories, there's one thing you haven't done once in the last 6 months. Thank her, mention her, or even confirm that she still stands beside you." Now the silence in the room wasn't empty. It was alive. Ali looked down at his notes, but Crockett wasn't done. "She may still be your wife by law, but based on everything we've just laid out, no sure, she is no longer your legal shield." And then came the line that set the fuse. "In fact, she may be your first witness." Trump didn't move. because if he did, something might explode. When it came, the explosion wasn't audible. It was systemic. Trump's hands gripped the edge of the table, not to brace himself, but as if he were holding something back, something that couldn't afford to be seen cracking on live television. Crockett waited, not smug, not triumphant, just precise. Then she produced the folder, black leather, sealed with a single brass clasp. "The documents I'm about to reference," she said, "were filed in the District Court of The Hague, part of a larger inquiry into transnational asset transfers involving high-profile American political figures and their spouses. These records have not been publicly discussed in the United States until now." She opened the folder. Ali straightened. Trump shifted slightly. "The filings list a series of asset conversions, jewelry, art, real estate, and digital currency, transferred to a trust labeled STP Sovereign. The beneficiary? Melania Trump. The executor? A European legal consortium tied to a private family office in Geneva." Trump leaned in, his voice low and guttural. "You better stop reading from that trash folder before you find out what real lawsuits look like." But Crockett continued as if he hadn't spoken. "These transfers were made in a window of 72 days, exactly overlapping the timeline during which your administration filed new provisions seeking expanded protections for presidential spouses and dependents from retroactive financial review." She flipped a page. "And here, on page 7, is the entry that raised alarm bells in every regulatory agency in Europe. Asset shielding initiated in anticipation of reputational fallout and post office retaliation." Ali looked up. "That quote is from her legal team?" Crockett nodded. "Verbatim. It's in the Council's declaration." Trump slammed his hand on the table. The microphones picked up every ounce of flesh on wood. "That's enough. This is a hit job. That woman gave up everything to stand beside me, and you think she's some traitor with a spreadsheet?" Crockett tilted her head. "She's not a traitor. She's a survivor, and the difference is important." Trump's jaw tightened. "She believed in me." "Then why," Crockett asked softly, "did she hire a forensic accountant?" 6 months before the 2024 election. Trump opened his mouth, closed it. The studio felt like it had lost oxygen. Ali spoke for the first time in 5 minutes. "Congresswoman, are you suggesting Mrs. Trump anticipated financial fallout from the presidency itself?" Crockett turned to him, a calm storm behind her eyes. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm reading from the audit logs, and those logs say one thing very clearly. Melania Trump didn't plan for 4 more years of power. She planned for 4 more years of consequence." Trump stood, not out of dignity, but instinct. He didn't speak, didn't leave. He just stood, because every cell in his body was screaming that he'd lost control of the room. And perhaps lost control of the only person who ever knew where all the vaults were buried. Fade to black. It was the kind of Florida winter evening that tried to pass itself off as spring. Palm trees outside Mar-a-Lago swayed gently under dimmed security lights. But inside, the air was still, stifling, suspended in an invisible pressure that had nothing to do with weather. No reporters, no photographers, just 4 people in a gold-trimmed room: Donald, Melania, Jared, and Ivanka. Trump didn't look up when Melania entered. He didn't need to. He knew her steps by sound, deliberate, soft, unapologetic. She held a thin envelope, sealed in wax. No name, no return address, just a red sigil, a mark unfamiliar to American legal systems but immediately recognizable in Central Europe. Jared stood in the corner, scrolling his phone as if nothing were happening. Ivanka shifted slightly in her seat, pretending to study the pattern in the rug. No words were exchanged, not yet. Trump tapped a marker against a large whiteboard lined with initials and symbols: TSLA, Doge, NATO, DOJ, circles connected by arrows that only he could interpret. a private constellation of paranoia and ambition. Melania walked to the edge of the table and placed the envelope down without ceremony. She didn't slide it toward him. She didn't offer an explanation. She just said, "You'll know when to open it." Then she turned to leave. Only then did Trump speak. "You don't trust me anymore?" Melania paused, her hand on the door. "I never did. That was never the arrangement." She walked out without turning back. Jared exhaled. Ivanka didn't move. Trump stood in the center of the room, the envelope sitting like a loaded gun between all the money in the world and a woman who knew how to make it disappear. Back in the MSNBC studio, Trump's face was a cocktail of contempt and panic. His right eye twitched, his nostrils flared. But what alarmed everyone, from the producers in the booth to the interns on standby, was the silence. He wasn't speaking, he was calculating, and that was worse. Ali cleared his throat. "Mr. President, would you like to respond?" Trump turned his gaze toward Crockett like a spotlight about to overheat. "You want to come after me? Fine! You're a Democrat. You people never built anything, so tearing things down is all you know." Crockett didn't flinch. "But you crossed the line," he seethed, "when you drag my wife into your grandstanding. You don't know her, you don't know us, and you sure as hell don't know what we've built." He stood fully now, towering over the table, his hands gripping the back of his chair like he could crush it into splinters. "This is state-run garbage," he barked. "This is Stalin with studio lighting. This isn't journalism. It's warfare dressed up as a conversation." Ali leaned forward, trying to interject. "Mr. President, no!" Trump roared. "Don't Mr. President me. I see what this is. This is a setup. You think you can twist numbers and dates and make it look like betrayal. You don't get to rewrite my marriage because you found a lawyer with a Dropbox account." Then he turned to Crockett, and his voice dropped. "I built this country's future. You just read footnotes from people who never picked up a hammer." Crockett smiled. Not wide, not cruel, just enough to say, "You're bleeding and you don't know it yet." "I didn't rewrite your marriage," she said. "Melania did. You were just too busy holding rallies to notice her holding receipts." Trump's face twitched again, rage looking for an exit. "You know what your problem is," he hissed. "You think being calm makes you right. You think quoting court filings makes you the truth. But real America doesn't care about your citations. Real America knows loyalty. Real America knows love." Crockett's eyes flickered. She leaned in ever so slightly. If loyalty was love, she wouldn't have hired 3 separate legal teams across 2 continents. In secret. Trump exploded. "She did it to protect me. You think she wanted this life? The cameras? The attacks? She did it because she believed in me. And if she moved a few things around, it was because she knew what they'd try to do to us." Ali raised a hand. "We need to." But Trump wouldn't stop. "I'm not your villain. I'm your firewall. You're welcome that I took all the bullets so your little law degree could get airtime." Crockett tapped the microphone gently. A soft, deliberate click. "America didn't elect you to be a firewall," she said. "They elected you to be a president. And you turned that power into a weapon. Even against your own home." The room fell into a freezing hush. Trump's shoulders rose, his chest heaved. He looked around for support, but found only lights, glass, and judgment. Then came the final whisper from Crockett. She protected herself, not from the country, from you. Trump sat down, not because he wanted to, but because standing any longer would make the cracks too visible. Fade to black. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The law was her volume. "What happens," she asked, "when the presidency becomes a shield for personal power instead of public service?" The question didn't float. it struck, like a stone thrown at glass that had been too polished for too long. She stood slowly, not out of defiance, but duty, a presence measured in tone, not tempo. For the past 3 years, we've watched as this administration turned executive privilege into a cloak for unchecked deals, undisclosed financial instruments, and familial protection schemes. And now, with Melania's filings, we're seeing the ultimate evolution of that tactic, privatized immunity. Trump scoffed, waving a hand. Buzzwords from a bored bureaucrat. You're not making history. You're recycling headlines. Ali tilted his head, cautious. The room was afuse, but Crockett didn't flinch. The Constitution was not written to protect the powerful from the people. It was written to protect the people from the powerful. And what we're seeing tonight is the abuse of public trust wrapped in marital privilege. She opened a small notebook and read slowly. Article 2 does not grant immunity to a spouse. The Emoluments Clause prohibits financial benefit through office, and no private agreement, not even a prenup, can shield a public servant from oversight. Trump laughed, but it was hollow. You think America cares about legalese? They care about results. They care about safety. You're talking paperwork. I'm talking protection. Crockett turned fully to him now. Protection from what? From due process? From accountability? From the truth? You claim to fight for America, yet everything about your inner circle has been engineered to escape it. She leaned in, not as a challenge, as a closing argument. You didn't just rewrite the rules, you rewrote the consequences, but no paper wall lasts forever. Tonight we begin the teardown. Ali cleared his throat, quietly, almost respectfully. Congresswoman Crockett, for clarity, are you suggesting the First Lady's filings were intended as a form of legal distance from the President's conduct? Crockett didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her folder and pulled out one final sheet. No, she said, I'm not suggesting it. I'm about to prove it. She unfolded the page, its edges slightly wrinkled, as though it had been passed through many hands. Because it had. This is a leaked internal memo, she continued, written by Melania's legal team during a private arbitration held in Brussels. It was shared confidentially among counsel, but one of the whistleblowers present turned it over to an American Oversight Committee. Trump blinked. Once. Crockett read, the marital protections being pursued are not a statement of personal conflict, but of strategic foresight. The client believes that should political tides shift or legal liabilities increase, her independent financial identity must be preserved separate from any administrative fallout. Trump barked a bitter laugh. Legal paranoia. That's not proof of anything. But Ali stepped in. It does suggest preparation, not accusation, but deliberate insulation. Trump glared. She did it to protect herself. That doesn't mean I'm guilty. Crockett was ready. No, but it does mean she knew enough to prepare for your downfall before anyone else did. That's not loyalty. That's testimony. The words didn't echo. They landed. Ali leaned back in his chair. The set was no longer a stage. It had become a courtroom, and America was the jury. Trump didn't speak. He stared at the table like it had betrayed him. Like the smooth, polished surface had shifted beneath him without warning. The folder, the memo, the silence. He had mastered storms. But this was erosion. Crockett stayed seated. Her voice no longer carried the sharpened edge of a prosecutor. Now it was something worse, something deeper, pity wrapped in precision. Mr. President, she said, the country isn't watching to see if you win. They're watching to see if you'll admit what you lost. Trump shook his head as if trying to reawaken an instinct, a playbook that no longer fit the game. You talk about loyalty, she said, but loyalty without truth is just a leash, and the First Lady cut hers quietly. That envelope in 2023? That wasn't betrayal. That was exit strategy. Ali leaned forward, whispering almost, "Mr. President, the audience deserves clarity. Did you know about the Brussels memo?" Trump didn't answer. Not because he refused, but because there was no version of that answer that didn't bleed. He looked up. For a second, just one, the man behind the slogans showed through. A man cornered not by law, but by foresight he never saw coming. Crockett pushed one last question across the table. "What did you promise her in exchange for silence?" Trump stood. The room froze. Not because he stood, but because standing meant flight. It meant panic. It meant something had slipped out of his control. Aides rushed toward the back. Studio crew flinched. Ali's voice cut the static. "Mr. President, please remain." Trump pointed at Crockett. His hand shook. "You don't know what you're playing with," he said, voice cracked and uneven. Crockett met his eyes. Neither did she, until she had to. And with that, the former president turned away from the table. But the camera didn't. It stayed on the empty seat he left behind. The room didn't move. For a breathless second, the silence became sacred, not out of respect, but realization. Ali finally turned his gaze to Crockett. "Congresswoman," he said, "you brought more than documents tonight. You brought an inflection point." She nodded once. No gloating, no smirk. Just gravity. Then she reached down and lifted a second folder. This one was red. "This," she said, "is a preliminary draft subpoena. It is addressed to multiple entities: the Manhattan Trust Holding Corporation, the Brussels Arbitration Council, and yes, to the office of the First Lady." Ali blinked. "Filed by whom?" "A bipartisan ethics panel. Their findings will include tonight's disclosures." She laid the folder down like a final verdict. "This isn't about Melania Trump. It's about precedent. If the highest office in the land becomes a vault instead of a service, then every future leader inherits a loophole instead of a duty." The camera panned slowly, capturing the stillness of a country taking in its own reflection. "This presidency," she said, "didn't just bend the law. It dared the law to blink." She looked at the empty chair. But the law didn't blink. It watched. It listened. And tonight, it answered. A moment passed. Then another. From the back of the audience came a murmur, not of unrest, but awakening. A standing ovation didn't erupt. It unfolded. People stood slowly, not in applause, but in acknowledgement. Not because someone had won, but because for the first time in too long, someone had refused to lose quietly. Ali closed his folder, looked directly into the lens. "This was not a debate," he said. "This was a reminder." Fade to black.